Welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Very much appreciated. Also got a nice message from Shilton, the ambassador for Milk and Honey, who enjoyed the show and has promised some samples of the Apex bottling. So keep your eyes peeled. Hopefully there'll be an episode of the show featuring those in the near future. So yeah, that would be really cool. Right, okay. So today's episode of the show, well, as you can see from the title page, it's Waterford and Renegade Rum. Again, it's pretty much been a year since I last did an episode of the show on some releases from the two distilleries, and yeah, things have been a bit quiet on the Waterford front really for some time, but with the new releases the noise level has been ramped up again, I guess, and as we well know, Waterford is a bit of a divisive name, I suppose. There are a lot of people that are fully into what they're doing. Obviously I'm one of them, and really sort of think that what they're producing is exceptionally good spirit, and tackling some really interesting things. Obviously there are others that are, shall we say, slightly more sceptical. I think the noise level is all a bit too much, it's a bit too preachy, all the stuff about terroir and soil and sort of dancing widdershins around sort of cornfields wearing antlers and brandishing horns with cow shit in them is all a bit too much. Actually, they don't do that. I've just made that one up. But anyway, you know what I mean. It's you can understand that the distillery obviously want to let everybody know what they're doing because they're doing some really interesting stuff. It's, they're a bit like sort of that cute little puppy that humps your leg. When you go around to visit your parents for tea and. Oops, probably upset them again. Sort of, let's keep insulting insulting the hand that feeds me, shall we say? But no. The reality is that sort of Waterford is really a giant experiment, and they're just doing things that sort of maybe other sort of distilleries, other master blenders, master distillers, what have you, have probably thought, oh, what if? But because of constraints, maybe constraints of distillery style or money, that these things just never get sort of looked into. But of course at Waterford it's a giant experiment. No matter how weird and wonderful the idea is, they'd probably give them sort of like a good thinking about and sort of run with it. I mean, so we've had kind of single farm terroir, single farm origins, all that kind of stuff. Whether you believe in the terroir element or not, of course, is another matter. But so they're looking at individual farms, individual varieties of barley, and now we're on to heritage barley. I mean, of course, this has been a big thing in America for quite some time, heritage varieties of rye and what have you, but not quite so much in the UK, in England or Ireland. So they've released the first in the series of the heritage varieties that they've been planting, and this variety is called Hunter, and there are a couple of others, I forget the names, that are in the pipeline. But of course, obviously, to get these seeds, they had to go to a seed bank, sort of a seed laboratory, I suppose. I think it was in Cork or somewhere in Ireland, anyway. They've had, obviously, probably not really needed to convince which farmer. I do know the name, chap called Tom Bryan at I'm not going to try and pronounce the farm name because I'll probably murder it. I mean, obviously all the farmers they work with are fully paid up members of the whole Waterford concept, so it probably didn't take much suggestion for them to try a field of this Hunter barley. And apparently the barley is quite interesting. It has a lot longer roots than sort of standard sort of barley, optic chalice, that kind of stuff, and really sort of breaks up the soil. So obviously got to be good for the soil. The only downside is, and obviously the reason why it was kind of a heritage variety and no longer used, is its yields. Obviously, the more modern styles of barley, or varieties of barley, I should say, much more high yielding, and as we're in intensive agro farming sort of things at the, well, not necessarily now, we're all going ecological, aren't we? So looking at sort of, you know, ancient varieties of barley, and I'm sure their growers are looking at heritage varieties of all sorts of things to see, you know, what they taste like and what their effects on the environment are. So that's the next step. Obviously, you know, like I said, it kind of does follow on a little bit from the whole sort of single farm origin business. So they've done that. They've done the cuvee, which is obviously all about the blending and all that kind of stuff. And now we're on to peat. And then you're probably thinking, well, what's the big deal about peat? I mean, you know, the whisky industry uses peat, or certainly the Irish whisky industry. You know, lots of peated spirit is produced in Ireland. But here's the thing, and here's the thing that I didn't actually realise, is that there are no maltings in Ireland that are set up to produce peated barley. Just think about that for a minute. So you have all these distilleries that are producing a peated spirit, claiming to be traditional Irish peated spirit and all this kind of stuff, when in reality it isn't. They're importing the peated barley either from England or from Scotland, so it's not really. So what have Waterford done? Well, Waterford have decided that they want to actually make a peated Irish grown barley spirit. But because there's no, you know, maltings in Ireland that are set up to do that, they've had to ship both the peat, Irish peat, and the barley over to Glenelg in Scotland, and then ship it all the way back. You know, that's not doing the carbon footprint much good, and it's probably not helping on the price either. I mean, I don't know what the retail price is of these current releases, but obviously these peated ones, you know, the extra cost of doing that is just sort of like frightening. And like I said, you know, how many distilleries would sort of opt to do that? You know, they'd probably go, you know, let's just get it from down the road, you know, or get it shipped in. And so this is the thing, isn't it? So, you know, this is the first peated Irish grown barley. You know, this is proper Irish peated whiskey. You know, there is no, you cannot sort of say that this is not. You know, this is Irish peat, Irish barley, and it is the first of its kind. So I'm really looking forward to trying that. Now, not obviously, as you well know, they have their side project, I suppose, the Renegade Rum distillery, or the distillery on Grenada, and of course now we have a couple of releases from that. So we have two new releases, which the spirit is now obviously spent, well, just over a year and a half, about a year and 8 months in cask. Obviously, prior to that, we had the white rum. Now, I showed the white rum at a tasting not so long ago, and shall we say, it was greeted interestingly. You know, this is the thing. You know, white rum. Most people have tasted white rum. Either it's been sort of, you know, the ABV has been cut to sort of 40-odd%, so it's not too heavy going, or it's been aged for a few years in cask and they strip out the colour and it's all nice and soft, and it's not really new make rum, not like you know what Renegade released, and it's fascinating stuff. I mean, I certainly won't go as far as saying that it's an easy drink. It's very, very challenging stuff, it has to be said, and if you want to sort of, you know, find out what I thought about that, then do a search on the site for Waterford. Like I said, last year, about this year, September last year was the when I reviewed those. So I'm really looking forward to tasting those. Now, along with all the sort of you know, verbiage, I suppose, that comes out of Waterford, and you wouldn't expect them to give these two bottlings a sort of a pretty standard name. They've called them Etudes, which I believe is, well, it might well be a French word, I think, I don't know. But apparently, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, Etudes means a short musical composition, typically for one instrument, designed as an exercise to improve technique or demonstrate the skill of the player. In other words, Etudes means a guitar solo, you know, so, you know, Eddie Van Halen and all that kind of stuff, you know, Alex Lifeson, you know, they all practice a bit of Etudes. And you're probably thinking, well, what the hell has that got to do with rum? Well, I guess Waterford have kind of sort of slightly reinterpreted the term, and apparently, according to Mark Newton, who I must say a really big thank you to for the samples for today's episode of the show. And before I go any further, of course, any comments that I have made or will make in today's episode of the show are wholly my own and have no bearing or relevance to the company that employs me. So yeah, we'll just get that one out of the way. But anyway, so the Waterford definition of etudes is a study, a very precise spotlight on a single field, a single terroir within a single farm. And that's exactly what it is. Now, in the box below, you'll see links to all the individual pages for all 5 of these different spirits, and the level of information is just mind-boggling. You know, you've got pictures of the soil, you've got little maps of where the vineyards, not vineyards, where the cane fields are, and so it's frightening. It really is that they've gone to this level of information gathering, and some of it will probably be superfluous, I imagine, because there'll be a lot of people who will be a case of, well, what does it taste like? And well, we'll obviously get onto that bit in a minute, but I think it's really fascinating stuff, and like I said, it's a giant experiment, and I'm pretty certain there is stuff that they've tried to do that probably hasn't worked. And may well never see the light of day, and of course you sort of think, well, where the hell do they go next now? They've done terroir, they've done blending, they've done heritage varieties, they've done peat. Where do you go next? Well, I suppose you could say that yeast is probably the next thing to look at, I guess. Certainly Dr. Lumsden is very much into his yeast varieties and things like that, and has been experimenting with those. Another thing they could do, and I would imagine they probably have done, is ship some casks out to Grenada, see what sort of aging in that environment does to the spirit. I'm pretty certain they've probably done that, or if they haven't, they really ought to, because they've got it all there as such. So I think that this is the thing, that they obviously throw these ideas around, and no matter, like I said, how weird and wonderful they are, they may well go, well, yeah, what the hell, let's run with that. It may well work, and then it may well not, and well, all you get to lose really is probably money at the end of the day, which I suppose is in short supply, like with everything. But anyway, you give it a try, don't you? So anyway, I'm probably going to shut up now, because I've probably insulted everybody, and you guys probably really want to know what this stuff tastes like, rather than me waffling on. Yeah, right, I'll dial down the noise and introduce today's lineup.
What I felt back then when I was looking for recovery.
Right, okay, so we're going to kick off, like I said, with the Heritage Hunter Barley bottling. This is bottled at 50%. The spirit is, and again, information overload here, 1,161 days old, so 3 years, 2 months and 6 days. It was fermented for 169 hours, which is quite a long time, and it has been aged in a combination, obviously, in their regulation selection of 4 different cask types: 45% American oak, 19% first fill American oak, 19% new American oak, 21% premium French casks, and 16% Vin du Natural casks. So really looking forward to that, to seeing what this heritage variety gives us with regards to a flavour profile. Then we're going to move on to 2 peated bottlings. So these are part of the single farm origin. So the first bottling we have is single farm origin Fenniscourt 1.1, again bottled at 50%. The farm is run by a chap called Gerd Bryant. The barley is Laureate, which has been peated to 38 parts per million. The peat has come from County Kildare, somewhere called Ballyteague. Fermentation was 187 hours, so again, long fermentation, should be getting some lovely estery character. It was distilled in September of 2018, bottled in August of this year, and is 1,344 days old, or 3 years, 8 months and 5 years. It has been aged in 33% first fill American oak, 18% virgin American oak, 20% French oak and 29% Vin du Natural casks. The second of the two peated bottlings, this is the single farm origin Ballybannon, or 1.1, again 50%. The farm is run by a chap called Tony Pender. Again, this is laureate, and this time peated to 47 parts per million. The fermentation was slightly shorter at 167 hours. Again, distilled in September of 2018, bottled in August of this year. 1,346 days old, 3 years, 8 months and 7 days. 38% first fill American oak, 21% new American oak, 30% French oak, that's quite a lot of French oak, and 11% Vin du Natural cask. Now it's going to be difficult to sort of, I guess, well, we'll see whether there is any sort of terroir element. This has always been a kind of a sort of thought. Is there going to be terroir elements when you've used peat? And also, it's going to be difficult because obviously the different peating levels, the slightly different cask makeups. But you know, I'm kind of up for the challenge of figuring this one out, and we shall see. Then we move on to the two Etudes bottlings. The first one is single farm Parles. This is the cane variety, is a yellow label, only fermented for 60 hours, distilled in June of 2021, bottled in September of 2022, so it's approximately 1 year and 8 months. So aged in only the 3 cask types, which is quite interesting. 50% first fill American oak, 32% new American oak and 18% French oak, so no Vin du Natural casks there. Interesting. The second of the two Etudes bottlings is the new Bacelet, different variety, cane variety. This is Lancôme Red, again fermented for 60 hours, distilled in January of 2021, bottled in September of 2022, year and 8 months old, and now again a different cask makeup, only the 2 cask types, 70% first fill American oak and 24% French oak. So yeah, I think this is going to be quite interesting tasting. Oh, by the way, the rums are bottled at 55%. So yeah, have the water on standby, and right, let's kick off with the heritage.
Please wake me up, just like you
Right, okay, so Hunter Barley. Let's see what the nose is on this end, shall we? It's a bit oily, it's a bit raw, slightly fainty, herbally, earthy barley, a little bit of vanilla. It's got a very, I mean, you know, I must admit, I've not tasted a lot of old whiskey in regards to whiskey that was distilled in the 60s and 70s and what have you. But it feels like it's got that kind of old-fashioned character to it, you know. Now, I don't know whether this is subliminal, you know, it's an old variety and maybe that's what I'm looking for, but it really does come across like that. It's a little bit straw-like, it's quite soily. I'm certainly getting an almost kind of bran flake kind of note. It's a little young. I would have possibly sat on this for a little bit longer personally. I'm not getting a huge amount of oak. I'm getting a little bit of vanilla. There's a little tannin, but it's the spirit is kind of really kind of up front and centre, and that spirit is a little young, a little raw still, a little fainty, but really intriguing, really interesting. Let's see what that's like. A little bit more complex on the palate, has to be said. Slightly fuller, kind of opens up with this kind of wheatiness. Again, off the still notes, there's a little faintiness, a touch of honey. I'm getting more oak, I'm getting more creamy oak. Certainly picking up on those slightly tighter French tannins. The tannins certainly come through on the finish. A little bit of winey fruit as well, a little bit of white fruit, apricot. again, it just has that sort of old-fashioned, earthy, old-fashioned barley kind of character. It is definitely different to anything else I can think of that I've tasted. I still think it's been bottled a little soon. I mean, maybe it's just sort of like, you know, they wanted to get this out. It's, you know, it's been in cask for now for 3 years or so, and they, you know, they want to say, look, this is the latest thing that we've been working on. Touch too soon, I think, for it. I would like to see this with maybe another year, 18 months further down the line. I think that may well have taken a bit more of that kind of sort of faintiness, sort of off the still character, just off it. But you know, I think it's really interesting so far, and yeah, not so bad. Right, okay, so let's move on to the first of the two peated bottlings. This is the Fenniscourt. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? That's a nice nose. It's got lots of youthful herbal peat, some sweet barley. It's got quite a bit of weight. It kind of reminds me of Ardbeg in its weight, not in its kind of peat profile. It's certainly not as woody as Ardbeg tends to be, but it's certainly got some lovely weight to it. It's a chunky spirit. There's some white fruit. There's some earth, loam, minerals, a little bit of sweet heather. The oak is kind of really sitting back in this, and it's kind of only starting to come through with it now. It's been in the glass for a while. Give it a little bit more aeration and see if I can coax out some more oak character. There's a little bit of vanilla, some sweeter sort of dried apricot, that kind of thing, white fruit. But that's actually really good spirit. That is lovely. I mean, you know, just putting aside for 1 minute, you know, all the information and just concentrating on the spirit. That's a lovely peated malt. That's a lovely peated whiskey. It has to be said. And you know, and like I said, you know, if you don't buy into the whole Waterford concept, then you know, just try the spirit, you know, and just judge it on what's in the glass. And that's a really good nose. I like that. Let's see what passes like. Again, young, weighty, earthy, oily. It's a little younger on the palate. I'm getting certainly on the mid palate that sort of off the still note coming through. There's some spices, a little bit potpourri-ish, some vanilla, a lot of drying French tannins on the finish, bit of spice, but it's really got some lovely weight and fruit to it. It's got some fleshiness. I mean, the finish, although like I said, is a little dry and with a little bit of tannin, it's certainly got lots and lots of juicy fruit, almost kind of like opal fruits. Not quite as confected as say opal fruits, but in that kind of juicy demeanour. It's a lovely minerality to it as well. Good level of peat. It's really well balanced. Like I said, it's even given all the oak really is kind of sitting in the background and only kind of comes through after the spirit has kind of like, you know, shown its hand, so to speak. So yeah, that's good peated spirit.
And it's so absurd, 'cause you see.
Right, okay, so let's move on to the Ballybannon. This is obviously slightly higher peating level at 47 parts per million. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Whew, that's pungent. It's rawer than, is that really a word? Rawer? Yeah, I suppose it probably is. It's rawer than the Fenniscourt. It's got a sort of passing sort of semblance to young Kalila. It's got a nice slightly oily character, not as weighty as the Fenniscourt. More kind of almost salty peat. There's a little bit of apricot, some white fruit, some honey underneath. It's not quite as complex as the Fenniscourt. It's a little bit more simpler, but it's different, which is what you would hope for. And yes, the peat is a little bit more prevalent, but it is, like I said, it is distinctly different. Now, it is, like I said, it's a bit difficult to say, am I getting kind of terroir elements here because of the different peating levels, and but I can definitely tell you that it is very spirit orientated. All the oak is kind of sitting really in the background, and I'm not really getting an awful lot of influence on the nose anyway from the French oak. There's like I say, there's a little bit of vanilla, but it is very, very much about the spirit. Let's see what the pal's like. That's a nice ashy peaty aftertaste. A little bit more oak on the palate, a bit like the Fenniscourt, but I'm getting more of that kind of vin de natural, sort of late harvested honey, sort of white fruits and apricot and that kind of thing. Again, a little raw on the mid palate. Again, so maybe sort of a little Kalila-y kind of like, but maybe not quite so salty as Kalila. Green apple, green pepper, a little bit of spice, earth, loam, peat. That's good. Got a nice chewy aftertaste as well, with a little bit of sort of creamy American oak coming through. Again, yeah, it's a bit young, but I think that's in a really nice place. I think it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves. Will we get more oak character on as the spirit progresses? One imagines so. Am I getting a lot of terroir? Difficult to say, really. I mean, it's obviously got this kind of earthy character. They're definitely different to each other, but then being different peated levels does kind of like sort of throw you off a little bit. But there's a definite difference between the two. So I guess at the end of the day, that difference can only really be accredited to the farms that these particular the barley came from. So yeah. But either way, like I say, ignoring all of that, they're both really very, very good.
Please wake me up, just like you always.
Right, okay, so let's move on to the first of the two Etudes single farm origin rums. This is the Pearls. Let's see where the nose goes on this, and I tell you what, I don't even have to stick my nose into it. I can smell it from here. I mean, you know, oh. Volatile is not the word. I mean, Jesus. I mean, whoa, fusel. that's today's word. Fusel. It's raw. It's young. It's, well, there's a bit of oak interaction, and there's a little bit of dried apricot, a little bit of orange marmalade. That's a weird combination, as we said. Weird, you know, orange marmalade and fusel oils. Yeah, I'll have that on the toast for breakfast. That's a little bit of oak. Not a great deal, it has to be said. We're still in sort of like, you know, raw cane spirit territory here. But, you know, this is the thing, if you've never had proper rum, I mean, so much of the rum that's on the market today really is kind of like, you know, either sort of like, you know, caramelised, sweetened, all that kind of stuff, you know. And so it is refreshing. I mean, it's, you know, are you going to want to drink this all the time? Well, probably not, but yeah, nothing like having a bottle of this in the cupboard to scare the neighbours. Anyway, let's see what the palate's like. Chewy, a little less fusel on the palate, it has to be said. I'm getting more oak, more American oaks, sort of got that, giving it a little bit of a sweetness. There's some starting to get in some almost sort of sweet tropical fruit. There's a nice level of spice coming through on the finish, you know, French oak spice. But it's still quite raw cane spirit. Like I said, not quite so fusel, and intense, and you can feel the alcohol in your gums, as to be said. Anyway, let's put a little drop of water with that and see what happens. Okay, it's not quite so raw now, obviously. I mean, because I've obviously diluted the alcohol. A little bit more dried fruit on the nose, a little bit more oak. Still a bit sort of straightforward, which is to be expected given its age. Let's see what pass my hand. Oh, God. Yeah, took your pepper then. It's alright, it's a little linear, nice dried fruit, a little bit of waxy kind of fruit skin there on the finish. It's work in progress, it is what it is at the moment. It's still a bit kind of ungainly, I suppose, but it's a fascinating insight into how rum matures and how rum interacts with its cask. And yeah, okay, so I guess this is probably going to be not a cheap bottle at the end of the day, and you know, so you know, you're going to have to shell out if you want to find this. And you know, again, I would love to see sort of a little sampler pack, you know, with obviously it's not the same farm as the previous releases, but you know, that would just be really nice. And again, I've said to Mark at Waterford on several occasions that, you know, as a retailer you can bang on about the whole kind of terroir concept, but when you're just buying an individual bottling, it's kind of, you're tasting it in isolation. And again, I've mentioned the fact that, you know, it would be nice to have smaller bottles, maybe a selection in a selection pack or something like that, and you know, it would really bring home the whole idea, the whole concept, because you would be able to taste 2, 3 or 4 or whatever, and you know, you would then see there is a distinct difference. Anyway, interesting bottling, it has to be said. Not quite sure it's there yet, but it's a sort of a snapshot, isn't it, I suppose.
It's fine, I'll take what I can get, but could you please?
Right, okay, so let's move on to the final bottling. This is the new Bacelet. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? A little less fusel, should we say. There's a little bit more oak interaction on the nose, a little bit more creaminess, obviously more first fill American oak. I mean, this is 70%, and it shows. And I don't mean that in a detrimental way. It just shows that there is more oak here, and you know, this is obviously going to be, if you're going to carry on bottling this with this 70 or 30 balance of casks, then this is going to be sort of yeah, this is going to be a more, well, commercial, wrong word. It's going to, you know, probably, you know, be an easier drink, shall we say. A little spice, a little bit of taut French oak, but certainly we're looking at more first fill American oak notes, more vanilla, more cream, and overall, like I said, less fusel, less raw spirit character, maybe a little simpler possibly, but a little bit more easygoing, I would say. Anyway, let's see what the pass like. Softer, like the nose, more American oak, not quite so heavy on the spirit and not quite so heavy on the fusel characteristics. They are there. I mean, there's no getting away from the fact this is young spirit, but this works better than the Pals bottling for me. There's a nice, almost kind of Sauvignon Blanc grassiness there. It just kind of creeps through on the mid palate before moving kind of back into the oak. Dried fruit, tannins, spice. It's medium length. Touch of honey on the aftertaste. I actually quite like that. I think that is actually, dare I say it, sort of drinkable. That's actually sort of, I could quite happily sip that on an evening. It's got more oak character, which is just offsetting some of that sort of over youthfulness, and the spirit itself is not quite so fusel. Maybe that's a characteristic of the cane variety. Obviously, the different cane varieties, and maybe with these, it's made possibly less about the terroir and maybe a little bit more about the variety of cane and how it sort of ages and that kind of thing. But again, it's a bit difficult to say because of the sort of the makeup of the oak, and certainly, like I said, the new Bacelet is certainly showing a lot more oak character, a lot more American oak, but then there's a lot more American oak used. So it's again a touch on the difficult side, and obviously the purist would say, well, if you really wanted to talk about the terroir and all that kind of stuff, you'd keep you'd basically just stick it into refill American oak and job done. But of course, obviously, you've got to make a drinkable product at the end of the day, and that's the key. So obviously, each of these spirits is being tailored with regards to the oak types that are being used and that kind of thing, or the amount of oak and which, how much of first fill and all that kind of stuff. But it does, they are different. So obviously, I think again there is obviously something to this whole terroir thing in Grenada, but for me, I think on tasting these two bottlings, it seems to be more about the variety of cane and less about the terroir. But still really intriguing and interesting bottlings.
Please wake me up, just like you
Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Like I said, firstly, a big thank you to Waterford for the samples for today's episode of the show. They are just, from a sort of like an inquisitive mind point of view, just amazing stuff, and although I thought the Hunter was probably bottled a little too soon in its evolution, it's just really intriguing. It's nice to see, something, the guys doing this kind of thing. The two peated bottlings, I think, probably quite worked. I mean, the Fenniscourt was possibly a little bit younger, a little bit rawer, but certainly had some weight to it, a lovely weight to it. And like I said, comparisons with sort of Ardbeg, certainly in terms of that weight, I think were justified. The Ballybannon, like I said, I think comparisons with a sort of not so quite so salty Kalila ish maybe. Both really drinkable. Obviously, higher phenol content on that, so again different. But like I said, there's definitely a sort of a difference with that aside between the two. So yeah, I think successful, and obviously, as we well know, Peat works really well at a young age, and the amount of sort of young peated whiskies from all over the world that are on the market is obviously testament to that. The two Renegade Rum bottlings, the Pals, that's a bit still a bit raw. That's still a bit kind of work in progress, and I think interesting to look at this current moment in time, but maybe not the most commercial of the bottlings. Whereas on the other hand, the new Bacelet, I think, is a little bit more sort of forward in its evolution, although again difficult to say because of the the cask makeup. There's certainly noticeable amount of American oak, which not a bad thing, and I'm quite happy and could drink that quite comfortably. Less so the Pals, I think, a little bit too fusel at this moment in time, but again, really intriguing. So there you have it. That's this week's episode of The Show in the Bag. I hope you've enjoyed it. I think for me it's been really intriguing, and like I said, big thank you to Waterford for the samples for today's episode of the show. Yes, I'm part of the noise, shall we say, but I'm just curious to see what they're going to do next. So yeah, until next week, all that's left to say is good afternoon and good dramming.